Earlier today, Donald Trump and his attorneys literally argued before a D.C. appellate court that Trump is entitled to absolute legal immunity for the rest of his life for any crimes he committed while he was in office, even if one of those crimes was to murder his political opponents. It's an argument so insane, so un-American, that even elements of the Fox propaganda network were scratching their heads. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert buttons before you go. I'd greatly appreciate it. All right, friends, we have several clips to look at in this video, but I'm actually going to start before we go to the Fox News personalities. I want to start with Trump himself. Trump gave remarks after the about hour and a half long hearing before the D.C. appellate court, and he said some genuinely unhinged things that we need to grapple with since he's at the center of this and since he's seeking a second term in office, while simultaneously arguing that he has the legal right or the legal protection to murder his political rivals. Let's play some of these clips and then we'll move on to the Fox propaganda network.
Numbers came out today that are really very mind-boggling if you happen to be Joe Biden, and I think they feel this is the way they're going to try and win, and that's not the way it goes. That'll be bedlam in the country. It's a very bad thing. It's a very bad precedent. As we said, it's the opening of a Pandora's box, and that's a very sad thing that's happened with this whole situation. When they talk about threat to democracy, that's your real threat to democracy, and I feel that as a president you have to have immunity. Very simple. And if you don't, as an example, if this case were lost on immunity and I did nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong, I'm working for the country. And I worked on very hard on voter fraud because we have to have free elections. We have to have strong borders. We have to have free elections. Those two things almost above all. And we found tremendous voter fraud. We have a list of it. We have some findings if you want it. The press doesn't like reporting it, but we found tremendous voter fraud. Determinative voter fraud. But we worked on that. That's what I was doing. And they were talking about after. Well, nothing has to do with after I left. It was during the time. And that was what they really focused on today during the appeal. And they concede that, and everybody concedes that. And if it's during the time, you have absolute immunity.
If it's during the time you're president, you have absolute immunity. I feel as president, you have to have absolute immunity. Again, he literally thinks he's entitled to be a god king while he's in office. Now, he mentions bedlam in that conversation. Basically, if the case doesn't go his way, there's going to be chaos. Well, given the strong association between political extremism and political violence and the MAGA movement, a reporter asks a really good clarifying question. And I want you to hear Donald Trump's response.
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, you just used the word bedlam. Will you tell your supporters now, no matter what, no violence?
Thank you.
No response whatsoever. He just walks away. Okay, will you commit to telling your supporters absolutely no violence whatsoever? Not a peep, and he walks away. One last thing related to Trump I want to share. So he says in all caps on Truth Central, without immunity, it would be very hard for a president to enjoy his or her golden years of retirement. They would be under siege by radical, out-of-control prosecutors, much like I am, but without the retirement. That's not a good enough reason, I'm sorry, to grant the elected head of state in this country just a blank check to do whatever the hell they want for the rest of their lives. I'm sorry that you have to conduct yourself in such a way if you choose to run for president and you become president, that you have to conduct yourself in such a way that you have to consider the consequences of your actions like everybody else does. We grant considerable protections to sitting presidents while they're in office. The idea that that immunity should carry with you for the rest of your life is insane because it requires basically a gentleman's agreement. Okay, if we give you absolute power and absolute legal protection, you're not going to abuse it, right? We have no reason to trust any person, certainly not Donald Trump, especially not Donald Trump or any Republican for that matter. But that's not something we should even trust Democrats with. No president of any political affiliation should be given a blank check which stays with them for the rest of their lives. And if that inconveniences them, I'm sorry, but maybe you shouldn't run for president. Now, in response to all this, the Fox Propaganda Network had a variety of reactions. I want to give you a couple here. 2 or 3. And we're going to start with this one here. This is a legal correspondent giving the dumbest and least accurate recap of the D.C. Appellate Court hearing earlier today.
On his left. I have to tell you, Harris, I thought the 3-judge panel was somewhat skeptical of the Department of Justice's arguments. You could tell they were concerned about precedent that they would set if they said a president is not immune from prosecution for acts conducted during office. They also obviously are wrestling with what does in fact though happen if a president, say, commits some kind of crime while in office. Well, what happens after that? Yeah. But I certainly walked away from there not thinking that they had landed anywhere in particular, but that they themselves are wrestling with it as well.
Well, look, Harry, everybody's reputation's on the line here. Everybody's.
So listen, if you watch the video I did earlier, you'll see that the judges very clearly seem to have an indication as to where they fell. As a matter of fact, most commentators, most legal analysts, including conservatives, walked away, even ones who support Trump's legal claims to immunity. If you look from the Wall Street Journal, National Review, other Fox personalities that we're about to play, even they concede, yeah, the judges didn't seem to be buying Trump's claim that, hey, I need you to cut me a blank check for absolute legal immunity. That legal editor for the Fox Propaganda Network was the only one who walked away thinking, yeah, actually, I think they were more skeptical than anything of the prosecutor saying, hey, we shouldn't make our presidents God kings. That was a really stupid take from the legal editor of the Fox Propaganda Network, because the judges made it abundantly clear that they thought Trump's claims were much more absurd, even if they had questions, of course, about the special counsel's case. This is Kayleigh McEnany. I'm about to play a clip of her. She is a former Trump press secretary. She is a diehard MAGA Republican. And even though Trump has absolutely insulted her because she has flirted politically with Ron DeSantis, she's not quite as devoutly loyal to Trump, at least in his mind, as she used to be. She has been an outspoken defender of him, certainly compared to Democrats, right? Even she thinks this is a broad claim from Trump.
Distinction is where the prosecution will lay in on. But one key moment I think has to be mentioned. So the judge asked Trump prosecutors, I ask you a yes or no question. Could a president who ordered SEAL Team 6 to assassinate a political rival, not impeached, would he be subject to criminal prosecution? Trump's attorney had to answer that question. We're talking about the outer bounds here of presidential immunity. I think it's fairly obvious. Someone who committed a hit on their opponent would not get presidential immunity, but that's a tough question for the Trump team to dance around. And the judge seemed a little skeptical, so we'll see what happens.
Even Kayleigh McEnany's like, yeah, the judges were pretty skeptical on that. And of course, I love her appeal to, well, obviously, if a sitting president ordered a hit on his political rival or her political rival, they wouldn't get immunity. Says who? Says who? According to Trump's attorneys, it's absolute. It's not selective. They're given total immunity for any actions taken while in office, certainly any that could be claimed to be part of presidential duties. So think about it. Well, my political rival is a threat to national security. Ergo, I was obligated by my constitutional oath to take steps to prevent them from becoming a greater threat to national security. Right? You could come up with all kinds of BS reasons. It's all dependent on good faith. And Donald Trump is a gaping void of good faith, which is why we shouldn't use words like absolute. Probably not a good thing to make a person who's already by far the most powerful person in government, the most powerful person in the world, even more powerful by stripping away any potential for criminal accountability after they leave office. Jonathan Turley is another skeptic of the Trump team's claim. Now, this is a guy who will defend basically any Trump proposition. He's a hack. He works for, I think it's George Washington University, right? He's supposedly a constitutional scholar, but he'll bend over backwards. He'll contort himself mentally and ethically to justify any right-wing argument. And even he is like, this ain't it, Chief.
Is that the case, Jonathan? Can a president, under certain circumstances, order the assassination of a political rival and receive immunity for it?
I don't believe it is the case. This was really, I think, very illustrative of how the argument went. It was a series of jump scares. Both sides were presenting these parades of horribles that would come if you don't accept our argument. I think what was clear to me from the argument was that probably Trump's this argument of impeachment first, prosecution later is a dead letter with the panel. I don't believe that the judges agreed that you needed a conviction to ever prosecute a president. But there's still a lot of ambiguity there. The question is what the court described in Nixon versus Fitzgerald as the outer parameters of presidential authority or duties. And the question is, does this fit within that gray area? Because the Supreme Court and the lower courts have struggled for this, and it's not clear. And so there's legitimate debate here. I did not come away thinking the panel was likely to rule with the former president.
That is absolutely the case. That is the most charitable interpretation possible because it seems pretty freaking obvious that they're dubious of it. And by the way, one of the three judges on the panel is a Bush-era conservative appointed by, I believe it was President George W. Bush, not his father, George H.W. Bush. Folks, no matter where you are in the political spectrum, if you're a good faith actor who believes in a democratic republic, even if you're one of those conservatives who say we're not democracy, we're republic, even if you're one of them, right? You should dread the argument coming from Donald Trump's attorneys. It should fill you with dread because it could easily be weaponized by the other team. A Democrat is president right now. Joe Biden is the president of the United States. And of course, he's being morally superior to Donald Trump by far, just objectively speaking. He would never avail himself of the powers of the presidency in this way. But just imagine. Just imagine. Think about it. If you think Democrats are really that bad, do you really want to give a Democratic president a blank check to do unsavory things to his or her political rival and then walk away without any sort of potential criminal liability? No, of course not. I'm a partisan progressive Democrat, and I don't want them to have that power. That's insane. That's the stuff of monarchy. It's just really gross, unpatriotic, anti-American things, and anyone who says otherwise is just, I don't know. You should have nothing but contempt for that worldview. Let me know what you think in the comments, and let me know if you were surprised to see that so many people from the Fox Propaganda Network were kind of gritting their teeth and wincing at Trump's arguments.